When we think of cults of personality, we often picture faraway dictatorships, yet some of the most powerful and unsettling examples were born right here in America. A political cult goes far beyond popularity. It transforms a leader into an object of worship, forged through propaganda, mass rallies, and blind devotion. Before the internet amplified charisma, prophets, strongmen, and demagogues exploited crisis and technology to command millions, rewrite laws, and bend democracy to their will. Welcome to the top 10 bizarre political cults of personality that shaped American history, where power, persuasion, and fanaticism collide. At number 10, we have Henry A. Wallace, Franklin D. Roosevelt's Vice President and Secretary of Agriculture. Fell under the spell of a mysterious Russian theosophist, Nicholas Roerich. Wallace, an accomplished agricultural reformer and intellectual, secretly referred to Roerich as Guru, writing letters filled with spiritual devotion that would later become infamous as the Guru Letters. What began as a philosophical fascination soon morphed into a covert spiritual dependency that blurred the lines between personal faith and political duty. Wallace even used government resources to fund Roerich's 1930s expedition to Central Asia, ostensibly to collect drought-resistant plants, but in truth to search for the mythical Shambhala, a supposed center of divine power. This bizarre obsession deeply unsettled U.S. officials who feared the mystic's growing influence in the White House. Wallace's spiritual entanglement revealed how charisma and secret devotion could infiltrate the highest levels of government, undermining rational decision-making. When the letters were finally leaked, the scandal obliterated his credibility, branding him as a naive dreamer manipulated by an occultist. His failed 1948 presidential run as the Progressive Party's candidate became a public reckoning, symbolizing how unexamined faith in a self-proclaimed prophet could derail even the most promising political career. At number 9, we find John Humphrey Noyes. In the mid-19th century, America witnessed an eruption of utopian experiments, but none as radical or politically unsettling as John Humphrey Noyes' Oneida Community. Preaching a doctrine he called perfectionism, Noyes declared that Christ's second coming had already occurred, liberating believers from sin and social convention. From this creed, he built a self-sustaining society of 300 followers in upstate New York, over which he ruled with absolute patriarchal power. The Oneida Community rejected monogamy in favor of complex marriage, where every man and woman were spiritually united and sexual relations were governed by Noyes' personal approval. Property, wealth, and even parenthood were shared, a complete rejection of capitalism and the nuclear family. Noyes' authoritarian control extended to human reproduction through stirpiculture, an early form of eugenics where he decided who could bear children, transforming spiritual leadership into genetic dictatorship. The group's economic success producing silverware, animal traps, and other goods made Oneida a thriving socialist microstate within capitalist America, alarming both church leaders and lawmakers. What made Noyes' movement particularly bizarre was its fusion of divine destiny with scientific control, turning theology into a totalitarian social experiment. Ultimately, public outrage, legal pressure, and accusations of sexual coercion forced Noyes to flee to Canada in 1879. The collapse of Oneida exposed the peril of unchecked authority disguised as spiritual purity, proving that even utopian visions can mutate into political cults when led by a man convinced of his own perfection. At number 8, we arrive at Elijah Muhammad. In the turbulent racial landscape of 20th century America, Elijah Muhammad rose as a spiritual and political figure who reshaped the identity of black nationalism through the Nation of Islam. Emerging from the teachings of the mysterious Master Fard Muhammad, Elijah transformed a small religious sect into a disciplined, separatist movement that demanded total devotion. Declaring himself the messenger of Allah, he fused theology with racial empowerment, preaching that African Americans were the original people and that white society was inherently devilish. Under his rule, the Nation of Islam established an independent network of schools, farms, and businesses, creating a parallel economy that defied federal authority. His teachings inspired figures like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, whose global influence amplified the movement's message of self-reliance and pride. Yet, the internal culture of the NOI was marked by unquestioning obedience. Elijah's word was divine law. His strict moral code, economic discipline, and demand for racial separation turned the organization into a sovereign ideological state within America. The government viewed him as a subversive threat, fearing that his movement's unity and militancy could spark a political revolution. What makes Elijah Muhammad's leadership so bizarre and compelling is how seamlessly he merged religious prophecy with authoritarian politics, creating a cult of personality that replaced national loyalty with spiritual allegiance. Even after his death in 1975, the Nation of Islam's structure, ideology, and political weight bore the unmistakable imprint of his absolute command, a testament to how faith and power can merge into a formidable, separatist force that redefined America's racial and political landscape. At number 7, we have Father Divine. Emerging from the economic despair of the Great Depression, Father Divine, born George Baker, rose as a self-proclaimed messiah who transformed spiritual charisma into a powerful social and political movement. Known as Reverend Major Jealous Divine, he established the International Peace Mission movement, which attracted tens of thousands across racial and class boundaries. What made his following truly bizarre was his claim to be the literal, physical incarnation of God, an assertion his devotees accepted without question, even capitalizing pronouns, referring to him in sacred reverence. Yet beneath this divine proclamation lay an unexpectedly pragmatic empire. Divine built self-sufficient communities, complete with hotels, farms, and businesses, all promoting economic independence and racial equality at a time when systemic oppression was rampant. His movement rejected welfare dependency, instead emphasizing hard work, thrift, and communal sharing, offering spiritual dignity and material stability to America's impoverished. The spectacular Holy Communion banquets, open to all regardless of race, symbolized divine abundance amid the Depression's hunger. Despite his godlike persona, Father Divine wielded his cult's unity for progressive activism, opposing lynching, segregation, and racial violence long before mainstream civil rights leaders. Politicians and journalists alike were baffled by how a man claiming divinity could command a disciplined, racially integrated political base that practiced what the government preached but failed to deliver. His strange synthesis of theology and economics made him both prophet and reformer, a god of Harlem who used spiritual absolutism to engineer real-world social transformation. Father Divine's empire of faith stands as one of the most fascinating examples of how divine identity, economic autonomy, and political influence fused into one man's living cult of personality. At number 6, we find Dr. Francis E. Townsend. During the Great Depression, when millions of elderly Americans were left destitute, Dr. Francis E. Townsend, a modest physician from California, ignited one of the most extraordinary populist movements in U.S. political history. His proposal, the Townsend Plan, was deceptively simple yet revolutionary. Every citizen over 60 would receive a $200 monthly pension, provided it was fully spent within 30 days to stimulate the economy. Economists dismissed it as financial fantasy, but desperate citizens embraced Townsend's promise with near religious devotion. His followers, organized into over 8,000 Townsend clubs nationwide, functioned less like advocacy groups and more like congregations in a new economic faith. Members rallied, donated, and campaigned with fanatic energy, treating Townsend's speeches as sermons and his plan as gospel. Local chapters even intimidated businesses and newspapers that refused to endorse the movement, demonstrating how economic desperation could evolve into a cultic political machine. The astonishing speed of mobilization alarmed Washington. President Franklin D. Roosevelt recognized the movement's destabilizing potential and countered it by introducing the Social Security Act of 1935, a direct political response designed to undercut Townsend's following. Despite being sidelined by institutional reform, Townsend's movement permanently reshaped America's social contract. His unyielding defiance, symbolized by his refusal to accept his own Social Security payments, cemented his image as a prophet of the forgotten elderly. At number 5, we arrive at the leadership of the Second Ku Klux Klan. Few movements in American history combined religious zeal, nationalism, and political control as effectively or as disturbingly as the Second Ku Klux Klan. Reborn in 1915 and reaching its zenith in the 1920s, this iteration transformed from a clandestine vigilante group into a massive cult-like organization, with an estimated 3 to 6 million members. Under the leadership of figures such as Imperial Wizard Hiram Wesley Evans, the Klan cloaked itself in ritual, symbolism, and secret hierarchies, presenting itself as the guardian of true Americanism. The organization's eerie use of white robes, crosses, and masked anonymity transformed local hatred into a performative, religiously charged spectacle of power. Unlike isolated hate groups, the Klan's structure operated like a shadow political empire, penetrating law enforcement, local councils, and state legislatures. Particularly in the Midwest and the South, its leaders demanded absolute loyalty, framing racism, anti-Catholicism, and anti-Semitism as moral crusades ordained by divine destiny. What made this political cult truly bizarre was its dual identity. It was both a terrorist movement and a mainstream political institution, controlling elections and legislation through intimidation and mass conformity. The Klan's nightmarish fusion of religion, patriotism, and fear created a parallel authority that often overpowered constitutional governance. For decades, it dictated who could hold office, who could vote, and even who could live in peace. By weaponizing secrecy and spectacle, the Second Klan became a chilling testament to how a cult of personality, disguised as moral righteousness, can manipulate millions, institutionalize hatred, and reshape democracy itself into a tool of terror. At number 4, we have Joseph Smith. Few figures in American history so perfectly embodied the fusion of theology, politics, and military ambition as Joseph Smith, the founder of the Latter-day Saint movement. By the early 1840s, Smith had transformed his religious revelation into an organized theocratic state within the borders of the United States. In the autonomous city of Nauvoo, Illinois, Smith's authority was absolute. He was simultaneously prophet, mayor, and lieutenant general of the Nauvoo Legion, one of the largest militias in the country. His followers regarded him as divinely inspired, obeying his word as law both spiritually and civically. What made Smith's political cult so bizarre was its unprecedented blending of prophetic command with military discipline. This proposal effectively sought to rewrite the federal balance of power, turning the presidency into a divine protectorate aligned with his movement's survival. His critics feared not just his theology, but his ambition to create a theocratic empire within the republic. Smith's assassination by a mob in Carthage, Illinois in 1844 ended his extraordinary rise, but his legacy endured, setting the foundation for a self-governing religious nation that would migrate westward under Brigham Young. Joseph Smith's blend of prophecy, political innovation, and militarized faith remains one of the most astonishing examples of how a religious vision can evolve into a direct political challenge to the American constitutional order. At number 3, we find Huey P. Long. In the turbulent years of the Great Depression, Huey Pierce Long Jr., the fiery kingfish of Louisiana, rose from humble origins to become the most dynamic populist demagogue in American history. As governor and later U.S. Senator, Long built an unparalleled political machine that operated with the precision of an autocracy. He seized control of the Louisiana legislature, judiciary, and even state police, ruling with an iron grip while cloaking himself as a champion of the poor. His slogan, "Every Man a King," became the anthem of his movement, as he promised radical wealth redistribution through his Share Our Wealth plan, which proposed capping personal fortunes and guaranteeing a basic income for every family. Millions joined his Share Our Wealth clubs nationwide, transforming local economic desperation into a national crusade. Long's charisma and authoritarian control created a self-sustaining cult that transcended regional politics. He demanded absolute loyalty, punished dissent, and used radio broadcasts to speak directly to the masses with a preacher's cadence and a dictator's confidence. His rise terrified President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who viewed Long as the most serious domestic threat to his New Deal coalition. The bizarre paradox of Huey Long's movement was its blend of genuine reform and ruthless autocracy. He built roads, schools, and hospitals, even as he dismantled democratic checks in the process. His assassination in 1935, just as he prepared to launch a presidential bid, froze his legend in mythic form. To his followers, he was the martyred kingfish who stood up to the elites. To his opponents, he was proof that America was not immune to dictatorship. Long's political cult remains a case study in how populist rhetoric, when fused with absolute power, can turn democracy into personal rule. At number 2, we arrive at Father Charles Coughlin. Before social media and television shaped politics, one man proved that a single voice could command a nation. Father Coughlin, the so-called radio priest from Michigan. Beginning his broadcasts in 1926, Coughlin harnessed the new medium of radio to bypass political and journalistic institutions, speaking directly to an audience that would grow to tens of millions. His mellow yet commanding voice carried sermons that blurred the lines between religion and politics, transforming mass communication into a spiritual weapon. Initially an ally of Franklin D. Roosevelt, Coughlin soon turned his platform into a pulpit of populist rage, attacking bankers, communists, and eventually the president himself. His National Union for Social Justice became a nationwide political organization devoted to his economic doctrines, which mixed Catholic social teaching with anti-capitalist rhetoric. The bizarre evolution of Coughlin's cult came as his message darkened his weekly newspaper, Social Justice, began publishing anti-Semitic propaganda, including excerpts from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, aligning him disturbingly close to fascist ideology. At the height of his influence, entire counties reportedly shifted voting patterns based on exposure to his broadcasts, making him the first media-driven political power broker in American history. By the late 1930s, the U.S. government and the Catholic hierarchy were forced to silence him, fearing his potential to destabilize wartime unity. Father Coughlin's rise and fall revealed the dangerous alchemy of mass media, religious charisma, and political grievance, an early warning of how technology could birth a populist cult of personality capable of reshaping a democracy from behind a microphone. At number 1, we conclude with George C. Wallace. Dominating Southern politics for over 2 decades, George C. Wallace of Alabama stands as the ultimate 20th century embodiment of political cultism rooted in cultural defiance and racial polarization. His 1963 inaugural cry of "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever" crystallized a movement built on resentment toward federal authority and the civil rights revolution. As governor, Wallace's power was absolute. He controlled appointments, manipulated the state legislature, and used populist rhetoric to transform Alabama into a bastion of personal loyalty. His followers saw him as a living symbol of resistance to Washington's overreach, elevating him beyond the role of politician to that of cultural messiah for disaffected white Southerners. What made his cult extraordinary was its longevity and adaptability. Wallace rebranded himself as a national populist, running for president 4 times and capturing millions of votes from across party lines. His rallies, charged with emotion and theatrical defiance, created an almost evangelical atmosphere where politics merged with identity. Even after surviving an assassination attempt in 1971 that left him paralyzed, Wallace's determination to return to power solidified his mythos of invincibility. The bizarre endurance of his political machine proved that loyalty born of grievance could sustain a personal empire for decades. By the 1980s, he sought redemption by courting black voters, a move that demonstrated both his political cunning and the depth of his control over public perception. George Wallace's legacy endures as the prototype for personality-driven populism, a cult not of utopian idealism, but of cultural war, grievance, and emotional allegiance. His reign marked the transition of American politics into an era where identity and spectacle could outweigh principle, ensuring his place as the most enduring, bizarre political cult leader in modern U.S. history. The stories of these 10 bizarre political cults expose a haunting truth. America's democracy has always been most vulnerable, not to invasion, but to its own faith in the savior figure. From prophets who fuse religion with politics, to demagogues who weaponize new media, each transformed crisis into devotion and loyalty into control. These movements remind us that when systems collapse, the voice that promises salvation often demands surrender in return. If you found this deep dive into history's most dangerous cults of personality intriguing, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more revealing explorations into the darker corners of our past. Thanks for watching.